end. Okay.
Well, thank you, and thank you for inviting me to this session and talk about emotional problems and well-being in early adolescence. Well, I have to say I'm trained as a psychologist, so this is a topic I should know, but I never worked as a psychologist. So in that sense, I have some distance to the topic, but it's a topic I'm really interested in, and that's not just as a researcher, but also as a, let's say, a private person. If you look at the media these days, there are lots of attention on how we treat mental health, and it's often framed in terms of mental health problems and disorder, and quite spectacular stories about self-mutilation and suicide, and we know that these things happen, but at the same time it's important to contextualize it and see how does that fit the overall picture in terms of adolescence, and I think that's one of the issues that I would like to address in this presentation. So when I chose the two words emotional problems and well-being, I think that was not just a coincidence. It's because it's two different words and different concepts, and I will try to go into that now in this presentation. What we also need to say is that this presentation, it will be quite, what should I say, HBSC centric in the way that it will focus on some of the findings that we have collected within the HBSC study through the years. But I'll also try to highlight some of the relevance also for clinical work with this age group. So just to start very basic in this presentation, emotional problems, what do we mean? Well, these are problems related to how children and adolescents feel and regulate their emotions. Well, the typical examples related to emotional problems is depression, anxieties, and what we sometimes call psychosomatic symptoms. It's a term that we often meet. Well-being is not exactly the same, because it's often thought about more as a presence of some positive emotions, as well as the absence of negative emotions, but also with satisfaction with life. And the life satisfaction, that's the overall evaluation of the quality of one's life at a given time point. And the reason why we need to think of these as two different constructs is really also related to the let's say new way of thinking about mental health, going away from just let's say illness or distress kind of model, low and high distress, but also moving on to the more positive sides of mental health, the presence of positive emotions and high life satisfaction. And so this is from the handbook of positive psychology. It's now 15 years old, but still it's a valid model. It's the complete state model of mental health. And where do we want to be according to this model? I don't think all of these quadrants are the same in that sense. Well, what we try to achieve is to move into the complete mental health situation. That's a situation with low distress, low mental illness, and high well-being. And this looks simple, but I think in many cases we try to think of this as a one dimension. So we think that we get happy or we get satisfied with life as long as we don't have any problems. But that's not how it is. So we need to think of these at least as partially independent dimensions, and we want to move into this complete mental health quadrant. Of course, that's not always possible, and I think I have much sympathy with equations like this. People in good mental health are often sad, unwell, angry, or unhappy, and this is a part of a fully lived life for a human being. And I think that's also something to carry on to take with us, that the presence of, let's say, mental health problems, or presence of emotional problems, is not really in itself a sign of poor mental health. We need both of these dimensions to be able to address people's need. Now I will move on to the more, let's say, research-oriented part of this, and this is really about much about the HBSC study and how we have studied it, and also what some of the things we have found out during the years. What I will cover now is two main measures of mental health related measures, and one is related to the emotional problems part, and the other one is more related to the well-being dimension. That's a measure of life satisfaction. But first of all, let's say something about the health behavior in school and children. I'm not sure how familiar people in this audience is with the study, but I need to say something about the study. And one is it's established in 1983. It's been conducted every fourth year since 1985. It's a cross-national study, and it's conducted this time, I think, in 47 countries. We are still counting, I think. It's also what we call a repeated cross-sectional design. The students are new every 4 years, but it's the same countries. So we don't follow students across time, so it's not longitudinal, but the countries are followed across time. So in that sense, it has a longitudinal component. And it's also a representative school-based sample of 3 age cohorts. And these 3 age groups, they will follow any analysis of HBSC data. They will typically be the age dimension that we cover. More to say about the survey. It's a questionnaire-based survey. So what you see here is not about diagnosis or clinical judgment. It's simply about questionnaire responses. And the scale I'm focusing on in this presentation is what we call the HBSC symptom checklist. That's the name of it, but it's not a checklist. So, but it's called a checklist. It's really a frequency rating scale, and the reference period for this scale is the last 6 months. So 11-year-olds, 13-year-olds, and 15-year-olds are asked really to answer in the last 6 months, how often have you had the following: headache, stomach ache, backache, feeling low, irritability, of bad temper, feeling nervous, difficulties in getting to sleep, and feeling dizzy. And some of these are, let's say, what we call the cardinal emotional kind of problems young people can have. Feeling nervous, irritability, feeling low, these are typical depression symptoms, and also anxiety symptoms, and these are overlapping really in terms of anxiety. And we also have some somatic complaints type of questions, which also feed into the same kind of problems. Really, they are highly related. So every young person in the study needs to complete this and put a mark. It used to be a paper survey. Now it's becoming more and more a web-based survey. So it's a bit about pressing the button rather than putting a mark. Well, young people are quite good at or understand this scale, and we know that this is a quite reliable and at least at face validity is good for this scale. It has adequate test-retest reliability, and young people. There have been qualitative interviews on this. they understand these items more or less as we intended. Not always, but in most cases, they have a proper understanding of it. Moving on to life satisfaction, the other dimension that we are covering in this mental health dimension is what we call a Cantrilladder. Now, this is more about positioning your life in a way on this ladder. On which step on the ladder would you place your life? And you can go from 0 to 10. These reports. So there is some scope for having a good life and having a bad life in this measurement. And again, the studies, methodological studies, are quite positive in this respect. The reliability is adequate. It's not perfect, but it's adequate. And it also shows consistent associations with other outcomes. So it's a measure we use a lot and we trust. So based on this is the core parts of the methods. Let's go into some of the descriptive results, and now I'm going to partly focus on let's say recent data, new data, very descriptive in a very descriptive way, but also on some papers that have been published through the years. So this will be a mix of new findings and old papers. So let's focus now, first of all, on what we have labeled as emotional problems among 11-year-olds. And we could have presented the same graphic for 13 and 15-year-olds. There would be a slight change to it, but really this is not too different really from older age groups. And if you look at these symptoms or problems, they are now sorted in terms of how big the about every day and more than once a week group are in altogether. So if you look at difficulties in sleeping, just to follow through this, well, 51% would say they rarely or never have difficulties in getting to sleep. 15% would say that they have these problems about every month. 10% would say every week. 10% would say more than once a week, and 13% would say about every day. And if you look from a, let's say, clinical point of view, what strikes us here? Well, some of these are quite, it's not common to have some of these symptoms every day, clearly not. But it's quite common to have them at least weekly. And if you look about every week, and you include the gray column as well, you suddenly start, if you add this number together, you see the relative frequency of every complaint. The other thing that strikes me when I see something like this is the big proportion, big frequency of not really experiencing this. For example, 73% has not felt dizzy at all, almost, and so on. And feeling nervous or irritability, that's the kind of problem that is, let's say, most commonly experienced, at least if you think of the percentage of that reports no experience of it. So about 50 to 60% would actually say that they have experienced being nervous and having bad temper or irritability. I think that's almost good news, I would say, that you at some stage experience these kind of problems. But the main thing is that if you look from a clinical point of view, these extreme categories are not very common. Apart from maybe difficulty sleeping, is actually becoming the most prevalent single complaint or single problem. Normally, we would not look at it as single problems or specific problems. We would try to combine these in some way and add them together, and that's really based on the fact that they correlate. These emotional problems go together. So if you're high on one of them, you tend also to be higher on the other ones. It's not a perfect relationship, but still, it's a strong correlation. And some studies have indicated that we should treat this as one big dimension, moving from high distress to low distress, high level of complaints, low level of complaints. Others have suggested that there should be two dimensions, one for the, let's say, psychologically oriented symptoms, and one for the more somatic complaints. So, I mean, like headache and backache and stomachache. The only problem with the two-dimensional thinking is that they are so highly correlated that what the essential dimension is one behind it all, in a way. So there is a high frequency, low frequency dimension across all these symptoms. If you look at, if you combine these and now we focus on one particular way of thinking or operationalizing this, this is the number of, or the prevalence or percentage of young people with at least two complaints or two problems weekly or more often. That is at least weekly, not weekly, but more often than weekly, actually. And this is the percentage that report that. And the main thing in this graphic is that once at the start of the period, the 11-year-olds, if you look at that group, boys and girls are quite similar. But when they get 15-year-olds, more than half of the girls actually have multiple emotional problems weekly, and that's a big change during this period. When I say change, it's not really correct, because these are different young people. So it's not a personal change or individual change. It's simply the difference between age groups we are studying. But this is the different, let's say, the different difference in between age groups for boys and girls in this case. That's something that we can see in a lot of studies, and a lot of we can also see it in the single complaints if we analyze it. We see it in feeling low, irritability. We see it in being afraid, and so on. So it's the same pattern on very many symptoms. The increasing gender differences that we see is partly let's say it's the same across countries, in the sense that all countries seem to have that kind of pattern, increasing gender differences. But on the other hand, it also varies. And what we have been showing in some studies is that countries where you have high gender empowerment, countries with should be high gender. It should be the opposite of this. This is actually an error. Countries with higher gender empowerment tend to have smaller gender differences. So this is actually not correct. So the pattern is that the more gender equal a country is, the smaller gender differences we see in health complaints. So countries with a low gender empowerment, they will tend to have much stronger gender differences, and this points to also some of the, let's say, cultural components in expressing and reporting symptoms, because it might be that in some countries it's more acceptable for especially for boys to come forward with their problems than in other countries where you're not supposed to come forward with your problems. So that this could be a cultural component. We don't know for sure, but at least that's how we interpret it. When it comes to trends in these kind of problems, there's also let's say geographical factor, and this is a study by TORBJORN in trends across from 2002 to 2010, and what the group of authors found out, or they compared 2010 and 2002. And the fact was there was almost no common trend. This is a forest plot, and a forest plot is if there's a zero effect, then you would touch zero trend. You would touch this line with the confidence intervals. If you have an increase from 2002 to 2010, you would be on the right side of the line. If you have a decrease, you would be on the left side of the line, and the average here is just about zero. It means that there is no common trend in emotional problems. But there are some countries with a decline, and there are some countries with a small increase, actually, as you can see from these. Because for all the countries that touch the line, there is no difference between these across time. So there's no real average pattern here in terms of increase or decrease across time. So moving on to the gender difference again, and then combining it with a trend perspective. One of the interesting, let's say, findings from a recent study is that it might be that this gender gap is increasing, at least in Norway, where I come from. And the finding in this particular study is that if you run a trend analysis, on the x-axis here we have time. So we have 3 panels. We have the 11-year-olds, the 13-year-olds, and the 15-year-olds. And for each of these panels, there is a trend analysis. So we have compared now, or run a regression model for the effect of time for boys and girls in each of these 3 age groups. And it's a bit atypical, this, because the blue line is the girls and the red line is the boys. So you don't get confused. This is really a difference that you see for the 11-year-olds. There is no trend. There is no difference across time. It's the same, more or less. But as we move on, we see a bigger and bigger difference in trend. And as you can see, for the 15-year-olds, there's a very clear increase in psychological. This is the sum score of health complaints for the girls, not so strong for the boys. So this means that what we see here is an increasing gender gap across time for the in Norway, at least, for the 15-year-olds, also for the 13-year-olds, not for the 11-year-olds. So an increasing gender difference across time as one of the main findings from that study. Just moving on now to contributing factors, and I see that this study is a study that also studied trends, but it also included analysis of contributing factors. And one of the interesting things about this study is the number of factors that they actually showed had an importance in this analysis. And it's really about all from macro level factors: Gini income, inequality, GDP. Both of those were significant, meaning that it's better to come. You have less symptoms if you come from a country with low income inequality. You have less symptoms if you come from a country with high GDP. You have less symptoms if you're a boy. You have less symptoms if you're younger, and so on. The strongest effects in this analysis actually came from the psychosocial variables, the family communication, the school stress variable, and also the class support and bully victim variables. Those were really strong predictors here in terms of the symptoms, and that goes to show the, let's say, the multiple levels of influence on health complaints. But the stronger impact is actually more on the psychosocial side, the family communication and the school variables, really. Moving on now to life satisfaction, and I'm not sure how I'm on time now, but yeah, I'm on 25 minutes according to this. It means that if you look at this, this is a similar analysis that we did on the health complaints. But let's have a look at this. You have 10 possible choices here, and when we look at these together, we can actually see which of them are more popular than the other one. Which of these are more frequent to choose? And these are really for 11-year-olds, 13-year-olds, and 15-year-olds. So when it says, when this blue 10 best possible life is big, it means that there's a high relative frequency of choosing this in that particular group. So moving on from this, let's say, narrow picture on to a more readable picture, what we see here is that, well, first of all, where's the zeros, the ones, the twos, the threes? They don't exist almost. So really, most young people tend to be in these upper parts of the stair or the ladder, and it means that if you combine these and just look at the 11-year-olds, for example, you would have almost 50% with a 9 or 10. So your life is 9 or 10. That's not bad. If 50% report that. You also see that the 9 and 10 gets smaller in relative frequency as you move on to the 15-year-olds. When you are at the 15-year-olds, less than 30% have a 9 or 10. But still, the big picture here is that they are quite satisfied with their lives. On average, you could say that these three groups have a quite high life satisfaction. And it goes in a way, it contradicts the let's say mental health problem perspective on young people. There is also a different dimension that story is never told, I think, in the media. That they tend to be quite happy, actually, as a group at least. And if you look at the age differences here, you also here have this is the average. Rather than focusing on frequencies, we can also combine this to an average. And you see that boys and girls on average have a score of 8.3 when they're 11-year-olds, and a score of 7.6 and 7.2 when they're 15-year-olds. So you see some of the same trend in terms of increasing gender differences across age, but it's not as pronounced as with the emotional problems part dimension. But you still see the same kind of pattern, a deterioration across age, meaning worse outcomes with increasing age. Well, just as with health complaints, there are trends in life satisfaction, and really the trend, historical trends, is it depends much on where you are and where you live. And Cavallo and colleagues reported that in a study. What they found was increasing life satisfaction in Estonia, Croatia, Lithuania, Latvia, Russia, and Ukraine, but also Spain, Norway, Portugal, and Belgium. A decrease in life satisfaction in Austria, Canada, Switzerland, Denmark, Finland, and Greenland. But there were no strong differences. And note, this is also, if you look at the time point here, this is also in the period of the financial crisis that several countries experienced, but there were no really strong pattern of that. If you look at these countries more from a superficial point, there are you could see a north-south dimension. You can also see an east-west dimension if you use a more geographical approach to it. But it's not a perfect explanation. If you think of east-west, I think that was the main point from the authors, that you could see some east-west let's say patterns here, but it's not really let's say perfect explanation in this case. Moving on to the Nordic countries, where you normally would think life satisfaction is very high. Well, here's the percentage that report 9 or 10 from 2002 to 2014, and the Nordic countries are quite different, really, because two of the countries have a clear, let's say, decline across time. That is Finland and it's Denmark, whereas Norway actually has an increase across time. So in Norway, satisfaction increases, whereas in Denmark and Finland it decreases. These are these are standardized by age and gender. And you also see that Iceland seems to be quite high here in terms of life satisfaction. That's also interesting, because Iceland was one of the countries maybe that was more strongly affected by the changes in the financial crisis. So just to, I'm not ending quite yet, but I'm moving on to it now. Conditions that just focus on conditions at micro and macro level that correlate with life satisfaction. Well, that was the study by Deleuze and colleagues focused on that, and they found quite similar findings actually, but with the opposite, let's say, sign that we saw for some of the emotional problems. A stronger effect of socioeconomic status than we see for emotional distress, but a weaker gender effect and also a weaker age effect than we see for emotional distress. Also here we see impact of gender empowerment, but this time it was not just on the gender difference, but really for the boys as well. So the story here was that gender empowerment is good for your life satisfaction, independent of whether you're a boy or a girl. But some of the psychosocial factors were exactly the same. Good family communication increases life satisfaction. Good peer communication, not as strong as the family communication. Also, liking school was a strong predictor of life satisfaction. So we see some of the same factors in life satisfaction that we see in health complaints, but not as strong gender differences, and not as strong, and actually stronger socioeconomic differences in life satisfaction. So concluding remarks, I know I'm on overtime, at least for my part. Well, one is emotional problems in some form is quite common among school-age children, and it's not really it's something that actually, if you combine these, a majority of students experience at some time. Also, life satisfaction is quite high in these age groups. So although we see that there is a lot of problems among school children, they are also quite happy about their lives or satisfied with their life. If you look at cross countries, 15-year-old girls seem to be a group of particular risk. And there are no strong common time trends, at least not in the published studies so far. Although some countries have changed. So if you look at the individual countries, yes, we can see it has increased or it has decreased. But if you look overall across all the countries in our study, clearly there is no common trend. So it goes in both directions depending on which country you're in. So future research, well, it's quite telling that no studies have integrated the analysis of emotional problems and life satisfaction. All of the studies are reported here or went through now was either on life satisfaction or on emotional problems. And really what we need is a integrated approach to that to see the impact when we take into account both the problems and the life satisfaction actually in the same analysis. So far we have not had any complete mental health analysis. And I think that's my conclusion today. And thank you.